So, The Apprentice is a film all about the relationship between Donald Trump and his lawyer Roy Cohn between the events of the late 1970s and the early 1980s. Now, I think that the idea of focusing on this relationship is kind of an interesting idea and trying to kind of like form a basis for how Trump kind of like amassed this idea of how to attain power and how to hang on to it, which is that, even though like Trump came from like a wealthy family, he made a lot of bad business decisions, but ultimately, it's if you can create the illusion that you have power and that you are more powerful, then that seems to be just as effective as actually being powerful, which Trump did embrace. But the thing is, like within The Apprentice, it's one of those like those biopic films which it just covers like the broad topic and just like narrows down to like a few bullet points and kind of simplifies them to a degree that kind of makes me uncomfortable with how much they try to like reduce so much of this meeting of the minds between Trump and Cohn to such a simplistic degree that someone is just going to write it off. It's just like, oh, okay, this was the guy who inspired Trump. This is where he got his, capitalist greed ideas. And that, this kind of formed the basis of this guy who just, decided to play by the game and learn from the best and betrayed the best. I think that's a much too simple. Like, here's the thing: if you're not familiar with this era of Trump, this is going to be an enlightening film, because you're going to be like, oh my god, like this is what Trump did, and he was being racist at this time, and like this is how he handled tenants, and this is what Roy Cohn did, and this is what Trump did to Cohn. Yeah, it's a bit shocking, and it seems like pretty damn good drama. But the thing is, if you've actually looked into like the history of this, it feels like they're going a bit soft on this. In fact, they go so soft that I think that because like Trump was trying to like block this film because he thought it was just going to be a smear campaign. Honestly, I think this film kind of goes out of its way at certain points to humanize Trump a little too much, where you're kind of like trying to feel him, feel for him more for like his daddy issues here. So in the film, Donald Trump, played by Sebastian Stan, he does a good performance, but again, it's one of those, much like a lot of other like biopic dramas, it's more of this actor, embracing like his own version of the performance rather than, feeling like Trump. It doesn't really sound like young Trump. In fact, I closed my eyes for a minute just to think like, who does this remind me of? And then this kind of sounds like Bill Burr in certain bursts. Like it kind of does sound like Bill Burr when I was listening to him. But he does like he does an okay job, I think, for portraying Trump in the way that this drama wants to kind of humanize him by showing him at his worst, showing him at his most vicious, and showing him at his most desperate and feeling like he's in over his head at several points. So Trump basically wants to prove himself to his father, Fred Trump, played by Martin Donovan, who, just looks down on his children, and Don just wants to find some way to kind of, rise up and make a name for himself in New York. And the person who can make that happen is Roy Cohn, played by Jeremy Strong, who Cohn has a history of, working with, people like Joseph McCarthy and Richard Nixon, which the film kind of addresses and has like Nixon in like the background at certain points. Like, these are the scummy people that Cohn has worked with. But I would say that Jeremy Strong's performance as Cohn is really good. I think it's even better. Like, I know a lot of people have been, praising Sebastian Stan, but I think Strong's performance as Cohn is definitely a scene stealer. And I just think because that, Jeremy Strong recognized that, okay, Cohn's got to be confident. He's got to feel like he controls the room and that he can smear anybody he wants and can take control of anything he wants, and, can just be outwardly homophobic, and then, behind closed doors can actually be a homosexual, which, eventually led to him, dying of AIDS, which the film does cover. But like I said, in bullet points here, like, because this film jumps around all over the place, that there's rarely a moment where you get to slow down and kind of see how Trump and Cohn were like building off of each other during this dynamic. And I think a big problem with that is that the film has like a big time skip here. Like we spent a lot of time in the 1970s for like maybe like the first half of the film with Trump building up, his credibility, and then it immediately jumps further into like the 80s when Trump has a little bit more power and he's getting ready to like throw Cohn under the bus. And like another byproduct of this is that you really don't get to see much of what happened with Ivana Trump, played by Maria Bakalova, and she mostly just becomes kind of like the unfortunate victim of of everything that Trump does. And there's a lot of like warning signs there that like, she probably shouldn't have gotten involved with Trump because like he stalked her to like a photo shoot. He made her sign a prenup under Cohn's, Cohn saying like, oh, you're going to get married. She's going to take you for everything. So sign this prenup and all that. And then eventually the film does cover the uncomfortable subject of Trump raping Ivana. That is in the film, but like a lot of key events here, it just kind of like it's there, it's present, it's horrifying, and it's briefly addressed, in between Trump's public appearances. Trump just kind of whispering like, smile, don't make me look bad, and then it just kind of moves on from there. And it moves on to like such a disturbing degree that, like clearly he abuses her. But we just got like the bullet points. We just got like a very quick scene of him saying like, I paid for breast implants, but now you're ugly and I don't like you anymore and I don't find you sexually attractive. And then, jump to his next big venture of like, opening up Trump Tower, and then jump to, tossing Roy Cohn out and, taking him for everything that he's worth and swindling him. And it's just all these key points, which would be fascinating to explore. We're never really given those moments because we have to like get immediately to like the next scene and the next showcase of like Sebastian Stan or Jeremy Strong, which, don't get me wrong, good performances, but it's in a film that doesn't really have time to explore more of the dynamic between Donald Trump and Roy Cohn. They don't have time to like such a degree that, it feels like there's one early scene in the film where Trump attends a party for Cohn, in which in like this, alcohol and coke fueled party, he just stumbles into like Cohn on like a gay orgy. And it's like, okay, that's the quick bullet point. Yeah, Cohn is a closeted homosexual. We got it. But then like the film also has like a lot of these like winking nods to, how like this is kind of like the origin story of how Trump led up to his presidency. So we get, like if you're familiar with, this time period, you can see all like the little Easter eggs that lead up to like Trump's presidency. Like, obviously there's that time where he was interviewed and he says, maybe I'll run for president. Haha, wink, wink, like he's going to do that. And then, we get the Ronald Reagan campaign in which, someone brings up Trump. Oh, he's got the slogan called Make America Great Again. Does it sound good? And Trump's like, I don't know if that's that good. I don't like politicians. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we get it. It's like, moments like that really kind of take you out and make you feel like this is almost kind of like a sketch. Like they're trying to lean more into like the comedy of it all, which is hard to accept when you consider like the brief admission of like the racism within the Trump family, and then just like the sexism that he has, and then him sexually, abusing his wife and all that. It just, all this, like I said, like that reduction, I think simplifies it to such a degree where it kind of becomes like, like I said, it becomes like almost like a joke in and of itself. In particular, there's one scene where like Cohn is at his lowest, where like he's dying of AIDS, and Trump tries to throw him a little party, and he gives him like some jewelry, but then he realizes the jewelry's fake, and they wheel out this cake that's the American flag. And throughout the film, Cohn has been saying, oh, my greatest client is like, America. Like, America's my client. And here he is with this cake as he's dying and being betrayed by Trump, and just cries over this cake to symbolize that, he's betrayed his biggest client. He's betrayed America. And it's almost kind of like this grim, foreshadowing for what would happen to America. And it's so very on the nose, and not in a very like clever, not like in like a very clever way for how much it wants to focus on that era, but also give nodding winks to like the future of it. So it's one of those, like, it's a very frustrating biopic because there is some interesting stuff here to explore, and there are some good scenes between Stan and Strong that I think are fairly good, that I'm glad I kind of watched the film. But ultimately, the more I thought about it, like, what is this communicating about Trump? Because, like, it ends right at the point, after Roy Cohn's death, where Trump is talking about, like, the art of the deal and what he plans to do for the future. And, they have that close up of the American flag in his eye. And it's just, just very on the nose. But it's like, this is all stuff that, for, like I said, if you're familiar with this era, this is all review. And if you're not familiar with it, this kind of just feels like getting, like, the cliff notes of that era when there is so much to explore. And I don't think the film gives enough time, the way that it just, skips ahead in time, and it has all these montages and these quick scenes and these and like like I said, a lot of scenes that humanize Trump, where they show him humiliated and crying and being bitter about, not being accepted by his father, and just, not feeling like he's a good person to such a degree that it's just, it kind of, like, waffles over what is this film trying to say, other than the fact that, the basics of, Trump hooked up with Cohn, and that's where he gained a little bit of his philosophy. And it's like, yeah, interesting, but we're not given enough time to, like, absorb it, or more importantly, to explore it. We're just given, like, the basics of this type of story. So ultimately, even though the film is communicating some key aspects of history, it doesn't feel like it's communicating enough, and doesn't really have much more to say, which hasn't already been obvious from how Trump turned out and the history that we do know about him as a businessman and eventually as a politician. So ultimately, The Apprentice, I think, had some potential, but it just kind of ends up being an average biopic that I don't really think is going to say much for those who aren't already familiar with the history. So yeah, it's good performances, but not a very good film for this type of material.